John Lusk here of Lusk Archery Adventures. Series testing, successful hunting. Well, I've got a couple new broadheads that I'm going to be testing here today, and they're by Tooth of the Arrow. Up until now, Tooth of the Arrow has only made the 100 grain and 125 grain in a vented version. But now they've come out with a solid version, non-vented version, in 100 grain and 125 grain. So that's what we're going to be testing here today. And I'm going to be using all the tests that I'm doing for 2022. I've got a new improved testing process and a new improved scoring process as well. So with the scoring process, I'm able to test mechanicals and fixed blades using the exact same tests, exact same criteria, so you can see how they really measure compared to each other. Each one has their strengths, each one has their weaknesses. But I think this is a really cool way to do it. It's pretty complicated. I'm still getting used to it myself, and maybe you're getting used to it, but you can read all about that, each of the tests and how I do the scoring in the description box below the video. And then I'll be putting together an Excel spreadsheet, and I'll be putting the link in the description box as well, so you can see the total comparative cumulative scores of each of the heads as the year unfolds and as I test more and more heads. And as always, I'm using my Bowtech SR6 set at 72 pounds, 27-inch draw, and I'm using a Bishop FOC King arrows, 460 grains for most of the testing, but for the really hard impact stuff, I use the Bishop Fad Eliminator because they're just so doggone tough, all right? So let's zoom on in here and let's check out these new Tooth of the Arrow solids. Here's a good look at the Tooth of the Arrow solid in the 100 grains. And if you're not familiar with Tooth of the Arrow, they're all machined out of a single bar of steel, 11L41 steel, and they're brought to a Rockwell hardness of 40 to 45. And what's interesting in this solid model is that most of the specifications are exactly the same as the vented model. The overall length is the same, 0.77 inches, making them, to my knowledge, the shortest single piece 4-blade steel broadhead that there is, which is just going to aid in flight. The blades are the same thickness as the vented model. They're 0.040 inches thick. The blade angle is the same at 45-degree blade angle to maximize the penetration. And so the same short profile, the same cut size of 1 inch, 2 inches of cut. So many things are the same, but what's different is they've taken up the weight from the ferrule itself. So the original, and I'll show it to you here in a second, has a pretty stout ferrule. They've taken some grooves, if you can see it there. They've taken some grooves out of the ferrule, and that's all that's made the extra weight. So that's really interesting. And here's the 125 grain model, and you can see, again, everything's exactly the same as the vented, same as the 100 grain, but they've taken a smaller scoop out of the ferrule to make up for the weight. So with the 100 grain, they've taken a little bit bigger scoop, and you can compare them right there. Let me see you line up the scoops, you can see. Yeah, so the 100 grain, they just took a bigger scoop. Other than that, they're exactly the same. Now here's the original. This is the 125 grain 1-inch original. So you can see there with the ferrule in this one, there's no scoop. You just got the tip, and then it just goes straight into a really stout, thick ferrule. Whereas again, with the 100 grain, you got a little bit of a scoop taken out, and with the 125 grain, you got a little bit less of a scoop taken out of it. So why come out with a non-vented blade, a solid blade? Well, many people prefer solid blades, okay, and not vented blades, and because they do have some advantages. One of the advantages is less noise in flight. Where you have venting, you have air passing through that hole, and it can make like a whistling or a whizzing sound as it rotates and as it flies at really high speed. So these will definitely be quieter. And then it can also increase durability because there's not that venting that creates kind of a thin area in the blade that with a hard impact at an angle on bone or something like that, it could be more prone to bending or breaking than a solid one. So that's the primary reason for doing it. But what I wonder about is how is it going to affect flight and penetration. In some ways, you might think, well, it's going to fly better because with these grooves, it's going to be more aerodynamic in flight. But the opposite side of that is, well, there's more exposed surface blade than there was in the original because so much of that blade was covered by the ferrule. There's very little blade exposed. So I'm curious to see what the flight will be like. And the same with the penetration. On the one hand, I could say, well, with this groove, it might penetrate better. But on the other side of that, I go, well, I've noticed that where there's a really thick ferrule, it often opens up a hole for the shaft to just glide through really easily. And those broadheads penetrate more effectively than the ones with a smaller ferrule. So I'm really curious to see how all of these things compare. So I'm going to be testing the 100 grain solid, the 125 grain solid, and for comparative sake, I'm comparing it to the 125 grain vented. I still had some of those around, so I'm going to be using that as a comparison in many of the tests. But I'm really eager to put these heads to the test. $200. The 100 grain solid penetrated 7 5/8 inches, and the 125 grain solid penetrated 8 inches, and the 125 grain vented penetrated 8 1/4 inches. $300. The 100 grain solid penetrated through 72 layers. The 125 grain solid penetrated through 69 layers. The 125 grain vented penetrated through 73 layers. Here you can see the 100 grain solid after going through the MDF 3 times and the steel plate 2 times. And I'm only testing the durability of the 100 grain because if any, that's going to be the weaker one. And really everything else is virtually identical for these durability tests. But here you can see it looks pristine. I mean, it almost looks brand new even after going through the steel plate twice. And you look at those holes and they're the classic tooth of the arrow square chunk holes, not just a little round hole with 4 slits coming out of it like you see in many 4-blade heads. So here's the head after impacting the concrete, and as you can see, it held up really well. Maybe a slight wobble to it, but that could just be the concrete that got fused to it as well. Really impressive durability. So what'd you think of the tooth of the arrow solids? You know, I think they've added 2 great options to an already excellent lineup of broadheads. The tooth of the arrows have always tested really well for me, and they've always performed really well in the field. I've taken a number of animals with them over the years, and I think, some people just prefer a non-vented solid blade, and for those people, this is a really excellent option. It's going to be a little bit quieter in flight, and I think the blades are going to be a little bit more durable because they have that extra support. But I think maybe the vented are going to penetrate just a little bit better, and you saw that in the testing there. And I think they might be a little bit more forgiving in really long-range flight. But again, that may be all within the margin of error. There may not be differences at all in those areas, because I think all of them, both the vented, the non-vented, are really durable. They fly really well. and they penetrate really well. So check out the score sheet to see how they performed in each of the areas and see how I came up with the overall cumulative score. These scored really well. And then stay tuned for the Lusk grade as well and see how many golden arrows this broadhead received. I'd also like to add that the best way to sharpen the tooth of the arrows is with the broadhead sharpener that they sell on their website, okay? And I'm not just trying to push their stuff, but, you know, to sharpen 4 blades can be kind of a problem if you're not really good at keeping the right angle of a double bevel like that. But using their broadhead sharpener, where you just lay the head flat and you get 2 blades at a time, 2 edges at a time, it really works well. So check those out. If you're using tooth of the arrow, those will really help you get it to a nice edge. Oh, and I also have a discount code that I can share if you order these heads from their website and use the discount code LUSK19, LUSK19, you can save 15% on any order. And so if that interests you, feel free to go ahead and use it. But again, great job, Tooth of the Arrow.